It is Friday, April 22nd. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back. It was again kind of a slow news week, but not really because there's still plenty of things going on. So with that said, let's start off as always with our PS Plus reminder. Make sure you grab those April games before they go away. You've got about a little over 2 weeks left or something like that. But either way, first story, let's talk about this new software that Sony put out for the DualSense controller on Windows machines. So Windows 10 and 11. This is a very specific piece of software that you can download on PC to where you can now manually update your DualSense controllers without connecting them to a PS5, because that was actually the one little weird thing this generation, is that each controller separately has its own firmware now that when an update goes out, you have to update your controllers. Well, you don't have to, but it's encouraged, and you could only do that on a PS5. Now, this is something where if you're only using DualSense controllers on, say, PC, or you've got one or two of them that you only use for PC gaming, now you can download the software on Sony's site and start updating your controllers only from your PC, not having to connect to a PS5. Moving on to our next news story, we have patch 1.12 for Horizon Forbidden West, and we're getting to a point with this game where we'll probably stop covering every single patch because it's been the same thing every single time where they're fixing a lot of stuff, and that's good, but there's still no actual improvement or major fixes in place for the shimmering issue. And it's such a weird thing where it's been long enough. Certainly it seems that this is a bigger issue that's not nearly as easily fixed as one would think. And it's also odd that for a lot of folks, they can go through the entire game and either have the issue and it doesn't bother them, or they don't have the issue or they don't notice it and they're going through it just fine and they're already done, platinumed. And the folks that do have it, it's really bothering them and they can't finish the game, and they've tried it on multiple TVs, and it's something where for performance mode where they just have to play it that way, it's becoming a huge barrier to actually finishing the game. That's really unfortunate. So until there's some sort of major improvement, we really can't say too much. Patch 1.12 again says that they're making, adjustments to the game's contents with the hopes of reducing the visual shimmering issue, and that's all we have for now. Now moving on to God of War, because one thing we saw this week was the 4th year anniversary come and go for the 2018 God of War, where that game came out April 20th, 2018, and so it's been 4 years, and in all fairness, a lot of people were expecting something to be announced on April 20th in celebration, and that could have been a development update on God of War Ragnarok, whether it's a small trailer or, a teaser, or hopefully some sort of state of play, but that didn't happen. We did get a development update, though, where Cory Barlog, and I'm surprised that they're still, he's still considered the face of this, franchise, and that makes sense, but I mean, Eric Williams is directing this game. Cory, we're assuming, is working on a new IP, so interesting that Cory is still, being the spotlight sort of PR middleman in between whenever this game gets talked about. But either way, Cory Barlog in video form, which is nice. We had him actually explain that, and it really not a major update here. He's just saying that, look, we're still working on the game. It's we're working really hard on it, but we don't have anything to show just yet. Which, understandably, a lot of people might see that and think, okay, does that mean this game is not coming out on time? Is it still launching this year? What's going on? Over on Twitter, the animation director at Sony Santa Monica, Bruno Velasquez, did respond to a fan saying Ragnarok is coming this year, so that's what we've got. And the thing is, I do think it's coming out this year. You have to remember that at least what we're seeing with Sony recently, and we can't always look at other games and go, there's a formula here. We have to see a game get announced 3 years in advance, and we need a new trailer every year at a major event, or we need development updates every quarter. Every publisher does this differently. Every developer handles it differently. And with Sony, at least, we've seen that we get kind of a major vertical slice state of play very close to when the game comes out, and we're not there yet, assuming that the game does launch in the back half of this year, or sometime, let's say, even Q4, right? Q4 would be interesting, but that's really far away. So it's going to be a bit until we actually get that. Also consider the fact that when it comes to trailers or these very specialized vertical slices, where like Horizon, for example, this is a really good example because this game just came out. That state of play that we got, none of that is in the final game. That was very much a purpose-built vertical slice that showcases a lot of different elements in what is a short amount of time. That state of play was like, what was it, 10, 11 minutes or something, and you got a little bit of everything in there. A major, blockbuster epic fight, destructible, the environment's getting blown up, running away, the grappling, cutscenes. We had all of that in a short 11-minute span, but none of that is actually in the game, although it certainly could be, depending on what you're doing in Horizon. But I digress. The point is, that was a vertical slice, and things like that take a long time to put together. It eats up a lot of resources, and they may just not really want to be bothered with doing that for what is an arbitrary date. Granted, the fourth anniversary is big, but we're not going to eat up a bunch of resources if it's not necessary when the planned state of play or next trailer or whatever is closer to when the game actually comes out. So I wouldn't say right now that this game is in danger of being delayed. And look, let's say it is. It would be like Horizon, where it's probably going to get moved to Q1 2023. And that's not really a terrible thing either, assuming we get a really good Gold Master where the game is polished and looking good and finished. I mean, I don't think anybody would have a problem with that either, right? So for right now, they've said time and time again it's coming out this year. I think it's going to hit this year just fine. So I wouldn't look at this and go, this is a reason why the game's not coming out. But we will see. Moving on to what is likely going to be considered the biggest story of this past week, where both Sony and Microsoft are apparently looking into and evaluating placing ads into free-to-play games, and it could launch by the end of this year. This initially started from a Business Insider report about Microsoft on last Friday, and that was really big at the time, but it only took 4 or 5 days for another report from Business Insider about Sony, and it's more or less the same thing, actually. A lot of similarities. It's basically the same article, although there are some distinct differences. But before we have a discussion here, let's at least go over all the details. So this would primarily be as a way to further monetize free-to-play games, and we cannot stress that enough. For the time being, it would be free-to-play games, and that would be to encourage developers to keep building on the free-to-play model. Expected to launch by the end of 2022. For Microsoft, it would be Q3 of this year, but for Sony, sometime by the end of this year. The ads would be sold via a private marketplace, and basic ad formats would be context-based. So, for example, that could be like a billboard in a sports stadium, or while you're racing, you drive past another billboard. But also, you could have ads that are viewed by choice for rewards or in-game items, in-game currency, something like that. And apparently Sony hasn't decided yet if they'll take a cut of the revenue, whereas Microsoft seems mostly uninterested for the time being. They want it to be a private marketplace for advertisers and developers only, and Sony is allegedly still considering charging developers and publishers for access to consumer activity on PlayStation. Sony, like Microsoft, is going to be very strict and skeptical on what companies will be allowed to actually partake in this program. And as an example, that would be, personal information being collected. That would be a no, like a big no for the time being. So that's where they're being very careful about how they go about doing this. That was more prevalent in the Microsoft article, where they're being very careful about how they actually do implement this, so they don't annoy consumers or, face some sort of huge backlash, which I would gather that's still going to be the same thing for Sony. It's not like they're going to be, oblivious to that as well. So they're probably both looking at this and wondering how they could tread lightly by actually doing this in the first place. But yeah, that's all we know so far. And, well, this is not exactly good news, obviously. It's bad news. But it's really strange, because not to say this is inevitable, but I'm very surprised that it took this long for this to perhaps finally become more commonplace in what is the more premium landscape of games, right? I mean, console and PC, because there's that distinct difference between console PC and, say, mobile games, or the kind of games that ship on mobile, and that very much is a marketplace where the floodgates are totally open. The worst of the worst kind of free-to-play models are very much alive and well on mobile, where it's, time-gated resources, waiting 5 hours to play the game again or continue, but you could watch an ad, or you could pay money to unlock that arbitrary time gate, and it sucks, but that is very much commonplace there. And, well, that's where there's a lot of weird challenges in place with getting it to that point in console games. and possibly also PC games. Microsoft ships on PC more often than Sony, so perhaps this could also make its way to PC games as well. There's certainly the concern there. And the even weirder additional angle to this is that it's not like we haven't had ads in these games before. It's very uncommon. But it is context-based. We've seen it in, sports games or racing games, and it very much is a real-life ad on a billboard, and that does make sense, right? So not to say that ads are awesome and I want ads in games, but that does make sense, and it's not nearly as intrusive as one would think. So we've seen it before, but obviously when it's a straight ad being placed in front of you in between a mission or something, that's where it's going to be a big problem. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you remember the well-known Sony patent from like a decade ago where it's that ridiculously drawn-out image of a guy sitting down, a McDonald's ad pops up, and to get it to go away, you have to stand up and yell McDonald's, and that was insane. But we, of course, never got that because it is insane. There would be way too much backlash for whatever kind of weird thing they were trying to do or patent there, and that's why oftentimes patents, we can't take them too seriously. But we had that, and there's an analyst in these articles that makes a really good point, which is that transitioning to the space, there's a lot of challenges in place to go beyond just the context-based stuff. You've got things where advertisers might not feel too comfortable serving ads in games that are, say, more adult-oriented, and that is where there's a big difference. With mobile, those games are very friendly and they appeal to a wide audience, and I'm sure there's very gory rated M mobile games, but you know what I mean, right? They speak to a wide audience, they're advertiser friendly. That might not be nearly as easy for the kind of software that ships often on PS5 and Xbox and also PC, right? And so it would be very hard to find good matches there. And then how do you place them in the game where it's not intrusive to the player? How do you also sell the ad space effectively by saying, hey, here's the impressions. Yeah, the game's interactive, but the player is always going to go past this billboard, or they're always going to see the screen, and they're going to see it on average for 4 to 5 seconds. Like, how do you do that for games that are interactive? So there are some unique challenges with even getting this thing off the ground to begin with, but in an ideal world, they do this where it's not, just replicating the awful smartphone model. It's primarily for free-to-play games where it's context-based. That way you've got players that aren't too annoyed. You've got developers that are paid beyond, basic cosmetics or whatever other, in-game economy they have. And perhaps for games with a lower player count, they can thrive and, live more comfortably. And also you've got advertisers that are obviously happy because they're serving ads and they're reaching a new customer base. It's just, this could go south very quick where it's not going to be that. And that's the huge concern to see both Sony and Microsoft possibly looking at doing this as soon as by the end of this year. So not to fearmonger, but I mean, if we see this come and it's not, if they do anything wrong here, they deserve every level of criticism and shouting and backlash that they're already seeing right now. And I would hope that it would be enough to deter them from really pursuing this in a meaningful way. Because to be honest, it's, we've seen models like this go away. Online passes, we've seen, NFTs are also a big thing that there's been some pushback, and hopefully there's more, because as it stands, NFTs seem completely useless and just nothing but another way to monetize the player. So we can see some of these things go away with enough shouting. So we'll see what happens. But so far, it's not at all encouraging news. Certainly something where I hope they are treading lightly if they're considering actually going through with this, because they're going to have a lot of yelling at their doorstep when they do this. Anyway, getting into our next news story, Mike Yosh, the lead animator at Insomniac Games for Wolverine PS5, recently sent out this tweet where he says, and I quote here, "So peaceful and quiet, it will not be like this for long," showing a picture of the Mocap studio there, which it looks like the same Mocap studio that Hideo Kojima was using very recently with the Sony motto, but yeah, this might give us a very good indication of how far along this game actually is, because that's perhaps the big question mark with this game, is it a 2024 game or a 2025 game? That's really, I think, the two things we're looking at here based on Spider-Man 2 coming out next year, and if they can hit that on time. But realistically, Insomniac is at a, they're doing 3 projects right now, and they're still hiring. They're up to 400 something employees with 40 or 50 more, job openings. So they've got a lot of growing to do still, and it's not like they can't handle all these projects at the same time. We've seen how efficiently they've, been putting out so many games lately, and also patches for their games. It's really incredible. They're, I'm telling you, they're wizards over there. But I have confidence they can maybe get this game out by 2024, assuming, well, looking at where they are right now. So if they're doing mocap, that means they've already got the script completely done, or at least nearly all of it done. Also, their game design doc, all that stuff, right? They know what this game is going to be from top to bottom. Now it's a matter of actually making it, and they could have easily done plenty of things beforehand when it comes to basic pre-production stuff. Also making a finalized vertical slice purpose-built level just for play testing and getting a feel for it. They could have done all that already before starting mocap, but doing the mocap now means they're going to make all these scenes and everything in between to put it together and make the game. So that could tell us that they could easily have a situation of putting this game out in the back half of 2024 or Q1 2025, which would be exciting, because Wolverine is that one game where it's it's an existing property, but knowing Insomniac is on it and judging from what they did with Spider-Man, it's just, we all know why that's very exciting. So I just hope it it's likely going to be awesome, but I hope it is awesome. So it'll be a while though, a lot of waiting to do still. Now, while we're talking about Insomniac Games, good time to bring up their multiplayer project, where recently, over on Twitter, Sean McCabe, who is the head of technology at Insomniac Games, recently sent out this tweet saying that they're looking for a senior gameplay manager to help build a world-class engineering team for their new multiplayer project. Now, this has led a lot of people to speculate on what this game is going to be. Is it going to be a new Resistance with multiplayer? Is it going to be a spin-off of Ratchet and Clank, another multiplayer attempt there? Good time to really bring this up, because we already had a job listing back in June of last year that more or less gave us a indirect idea that this might be an existing property and possibly another Marvel property, just based on Spider-Man, right? But that job listing back in June was for a lead story writer or a lead story overseer or something like that. But the job listing there had one bullet point where it said, works closely with project management, approves and monitors direction for brand extensions like movies, books, graphic novels, ensures consistency across the brand's mythology and universe. That very much so sounds like they're working with another IP holder to make sure that they're adhering to that universe that's already distinctly set, and that very much sounds like Marvel. So between Wolverine and Spider-Man, it sounds like this might be something Marvel related. So just bear in mind that when we bring up this multiplayer project, that one bullet point is pretty revealing, so it may very well not be a new IP or a Sony property, but something outside of that. Moving on to our next news story. Recently, Game Informer spoke with Jack Tretton, the former president and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, and I'm sure a lot of you remember Jack. He was the front-facing executive at Sony for a long time in the US, always presenting for E3 press conferences, and he left in 2014. And then I don't remember how long the gap was here, but he left in 2014, shortly after PS4, and then he went on to be the CEO of a SPAC company, which is more or less a special acquisition company where they're looking to acquire another company and then form an alliance there. And for the other company, that's great for them because they can go public and they have funding and all that stuff, right? So he's the CEO of that, which is they're called Power Up, and they're looking to either pick up any company that makes sense, but Jack is really pushing for something in the games business. But anyway, recently he was in this, he was speaking with Game Informer, and a lot of very interesting quotes about, well, not only his history, but also how he feels about, what's going on in the games business right now. And so let's go over some of them. When it comes to acquisitions for, Sony and Microsoft recently, he says this, and I quote here, There's a way to look at virtually everything that happens as being glass half full or glass half empty, and you can find ways to come up with negatives about these acquisitions, but I think the positives far outweigh the negatives. And the positives are that it brings attention to an industry that's already $200 billion and growing, and even though it's more than double the size of the box office and the music industry combined, I still think you find a lot of people out there that don't appreciate how big and sophisticated and mainstream entertainment gaming is. Now, he also spoke on the more competitive aspect of this business when it comes to Sony versus Microsoft and how things were back then versus how they are now. He says, and I quote here, "I think back in the day when I was back at Sony and we were trying to establish this PlayStation brand and Xbox came out and we're trying to compete with such a formidable company in Microsoft, it very much was win at the expense of the competition, counter what they're doing, block what they're doing, but I think the businesses have grown so big now that it isn't that way anymore." He goes on to mention that for Nintendo, they could never be accused of imitating anybody when it comes to, trying to, block what somebody's doing or try to copy what they're doing or be one step ahead of the competition. He says that Nintendo could never be accused of imitating anyone, which is true. He also says he doesn't think Microsoft will make Call of Duty exclusive, but 10 years ago, absolutely. He says, and I quote, "Rising tides lift all boats. The competition in the video game industry is not Nintendo versus Sony versus Microsoft. It is video games as an entertainment form against watching TV, going to concerts, whatever other forms of entertainment you have. So the gaming industry is competing for people's time and mindshare. And the more great entertainment experiences there are, the more that people in the video game business and the people that enjoy playing video games have to choose from." And that is very much true. We've actually heard those words from Jim Ryan somewhat recently, if I remember correctly, where he mentioned that for them, their main competitor is really just other entertainment mediums where you're competing for people's time, right? There's only 24 hours in a day. Somebody watching Netflix, Hulu, whatever else, that's time lost and time not spent on PlayStation or engaging in PlayStation games and services. Microsoft surely feels the same way, and that's something where it goes to what he mentioned about the competition aspect of it, right? The us versus them mentality. That's, well documented 10 years ago where it very much was that us versus them mentality, right? There was, on the corporate level, very heated conversations, strategies, and things that they were doing when it came to analyzing their competitor and trying to, outdo them, or at least on the Sony side of things, in the PS3 era, that was more so, the Western territory or the Western divisions of PlayStation, where the headquarters in Japan, they thought they could kind of do what they wanted, and they didn't consider Microsoft a competitor at the time, and that's also very well known at this point. That's why PS3 came out the way that it did initially, but I digress. The point is that very much was a thing back then, and nowadays, yes, they're direct competitors, yes, they're watching each other and certainly looking at what they're doing and making certain decisions based off that, but it's not necessarily leading what they're doing nowadays. And we've seen this throughout the entire PS4 and X1 life cycle, and really once Phil came on board. I still love that quote he made during DICE 2014 when it came to, well, he had gotten the position of head of Xbox, and initially he was very motivated to beat PlayStation. And I'm saying this loosely or paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote on hand, but he more or less admitted, there's only so much you can control, and instead let's focus on, just making a great box and focusing on the Xbox customer. And that's still largely what they're doing today, right? So Microsoft went in their direction with, releasing a lot on PC and all these consumer-friendly initiatives, and now Game Pass, that's a model that they're really focused on. Sony kept it more traditional. They're still doing, basic premium games and, a service that works for their bottom line, and they're doing their own thing as well, right? But the rising tide lifts all boats. Jack has said that so many times over the years, still using it today, but it holds true for the point he's trying to get across. I definitely recommend reading the full article. I'll link it down below, but Jack Tretton is a wealth of knowledge. I always love hearing from him, and this was no different. It was really enlightening to hear. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about to you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was another collection update. That was episode 7, so been a little bit. We'll always do those occasionally, so I'll see you in another month and a half or so for the next one, but you can go check out my recent pickups. And then, as always, another upload this coming Tuesday. That is it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.